Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our third day of Newark Arts Festival. It has been an incredible 2 days thus far. We have seen everything from a fabulous virtual gallery to participant events, and last night we witnessed a live projection mural that took place on Edison Place and Mulberry Street, projecting work of many of our featured gallerists and, of course, folks from Symphony Hall, the Symphony of Survival, and even including our moderator for today. So thank you all for participating. This year, as you know, has been very special. We've pivoted and we did it quickly, but thank God for technology. And indeed, that is our theme this year for our festival. Art and tech. So what you may not have known, that part of this festival, we had 3 key words that we used to sort of sum up this idea of art and tech. And those 3 words were perception, access, and power. And today's panel is access. And we're going to be talking about access in the form of rewriting history and reclaiming space. So thank you for joining us. I am Marcy DePina, and I'm really happy to be able to introduce our very first person who's going to be talking. She is the Director of Arts and Cultural Affairs. She's an artist herself, and she's a warrior woman who is fighting for the arts, not just in the city of Newark, but really broadcasting to the world that Newark artists are here, and Newark is a city of arts, and we are here to stake our claim. So please, everybody, welcome Fayemi Shakur.
Yay. Thank you, Marcy. That's so kind of you. I'm so grateful to see you all this way, Nell and Noelle and Lillian and Matt. Just quickly, I don't know if you have the images that you wanted to share, Marcy, but I wanted to share a little bit, or Marcy asked me to share a little bit rather, about the removal of the Columbus statue and the city's proposed plan to replace it with a statue of a monument of Harriet Tubman, which is exciting, impactful, and meaningful, in my opinion. So it fits in this context that we're talking about reclaiming space and rewriting history. And there was an announcement that came out from the Mellon Foundation earlier this week about $250 million being allocated for monuments, which are considered, these spaces of storytelling. And the question that we're really starting to ask ourselves, not just in Newark, but all around the country, is how do we teach history in public spaces? And how is public art a part of that? And so we are absolutely commissioning a monument of Harriet Tubman, and we're going to announce that call for artists and artist teams to submit their proposals very soon. But how this all came about was really at the height of all the protests that were happening. Monuments were being toppled all over the globe, all over the nation, particularly ones with this colonial era narrative and history. And Columbus was on our radar. And people were asking us as a city, what were our plans and if we were going to remove Columbus. And we didn't have a plan at the time for it, but we're grateful for all of this community engagement and listening to the community about what they want. And actually last year, we had an exhibition in partnership with New Arts Justice, Dr. Salanisha Tillett and Paul Farber from Monument Lab, which was called A Call to Peace. And the question that was being asked of the community is, what is a timely monument for Newark? And Newarkers were allowed to come into Military Park to an engagement research lab where they filled out their own kind of reimaginings, proposals, what they would suggest, what they would like to see, representations of ourselves and who we are now. And so we have received, some backlash from the Italian American community who, have said it's a slap in the face to remove Columbus and replace the monument with Harriet Tubman. But, I think it's part of the process of this reckoning, that's happening when we're talking about white supremacy and these histories of genocide and mass murder and slave traders and what heroes do we really want to represented in our public spaces? And what do we want to teach our children correctly about history and our children of the future as well? And we have a lot of historians like Dr. Painter and Noelle and Linda Caldwell Epps who can speak to that history about Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad right in our own city. The church at First Presbyterian Church, right around the corner on Broad Street, is a site, or was a site rather, for the Underground Railroad where Harriet Tubman often came to the city and visited. And so, we feel it's important for our city to communicate that history, preserve and celebrate that history. And so we're renaming the park from Washington Park to Tubman Square. And I'm just really excited about it.
Thank you, Fayemi. I mean, I'm so excited too. When I saw the news, I really cried because watching that removal was so historic and so important for us really to reclaim the truth. Really, it's about reclaiming the truth. They say that history is written by the victorious. Well, I believe that we are victorious and that truth ultimately prevails and that humanity ultimately prevails. And seeing that happen and seeing this renaming taking place and really rightfully claiming the history of our city of Newark, things that factually happened in our city, what a moment for all of us as Newarkers, and even on a larger scale, for us as a country, that we are doing the right thing, reclaiming the truth, and pushing our karma forward in a way in which we can truly live out what we say this country is about, freedom and justice for all. So thank you, Fayemi, and for all the work that you do in our city. We so appreciate you, and we're so happy to have you as our Director of Arts and Cultural Affairs. So thank you. So can't wait to see that. As soon as we have the new sculpture up, it's gonna definitely be a photo op, but it's still a photo op. I think everybody should go down to Washington Park before it's changed so that you can write the history as what it was and what it will be. So Absolutely. I'm gonna turn it over next to our moderator. We're so fortunate to have Noelle Lorraine Williams as our moderator. She is a Newark-based artist. She lives and works in the city. Her life work exemplifies her continued interest in engaging people in conversation using art, history, and contemporary culture. Her work can be seen throughout the city. She is featured in the Four Corners mural, which we heard about at the very beginning of this festival with our public art panel. And she was also featured last night, as I mentioned, in our pop-up photography exhibit. She's a teaching artist, she's a Renaissance woman, and she's here to be our fabulous moderator. Please, everybody, welcome Noelle.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and it's good to be with you all in this virtual space. And thank you, Fayemi, for sharing your thoughts. Fayemi is doing awesome work with the city as a former director of City Without Walls, journalist and longtime activist. She brings a holistic understanding to what the needs are, and not only utilizing grassroots framework in promoting the arts in the city, but also combining it with innovative ways and long-reaching, holistic strategies that look to sustain or develop what we understand as communities. So thank you so much for doing that. And I'm so happy to be here today to present the work, and also to have a conversation with the artists that are here about what it means to have accessibility or to have access to art communities, various practices, or what does it mean for those communities to engage art, engage their own practice, engage other artists. So this will be a wide-ranging conversation, but the most important part is that we're here with artists who exemplify what it means to be courageous, and what it means to be fearless, and what it means to be innovative, which are all necessary in the process of creating avenues for technology. So one of the ways I would like to start this panel is just by doing a quick overview of some of the artists in the past, I guess we would say 40 years, 50 years in Newark, who have engaged technology, creative practices, and history in their work. And one of them is Jerry Gant. And I'm here showing one of the first pieces I ever saw of Jerry Gant, which was at Open Doors close to 20 years ago. And one of the things that's interesting about this piece is that it's utilizing what we would consider to be almost a technology, right? So it's using something like spray paint. It's not in a traditional, what we think of a traditional way that art should be presented. And he's also employing these ideas about access. So he's both using in his practice, he's engaging various technologies, but also he is looking at access within the piece. So we see the gentleman who's on his knees. There are books, and the books are splayed across the ground. And he's utilizing this cross as a way to feed off this police brutality and the violence of the state. And then one of the things I just want to encourage the audience that's watching this piece is to definitely visit the Newark Arts Festival virtual gallery. There you can see all of the artists that are involved in the virtual exhibition, as well as other work that they're not necessarily showing in the gallery space. There are various smaller galleries that each of the artists have, so you all can enjoy, examine, and also share their work with other folks. So another Newark artist that I thought would be interesting to share as far as thinking about access, materials, techniques, investigations, and identity would be Barbara Kruger. I'm going to share a short video from her just so we can think about some of these ideas that we will talk about today.
How come any piece of canvas with pigment on it gets to be called art? There are so many ways of making art. Some of them more available to a general public than others. I remember going to galleries when I was young, totally intimidated. Certain works have to be decoded. I think the availability of my work was important to me because I was that viewer who didn't understand, who didn't know the codes. Performa approached me and the skate park came up in conversation. I just felt, well, that would be so cool. Money talks, whose values. These are just ideas in the air and questions that we ask sometimes, and questions that we don't ask but should ask. I grew up in Newark, New Jersey. My mother and my father, neither of them have college degrees. We lived in a 3-room apartment and I slept in the living room. I was always very aware of how where we're born, what we are given, and what is withheld from us determines who we can be in the world. I came to New York, went to Parsons for a year, started working as a billing clerk and then a telephone operator. Living in Newark and later New York, maybe didn't read the tabloids, but you saw them every day in the subway and everywhere. All of a sudden, I heard there were jobs at Condé Nast. I was lucky. I got hired as a second designer. If you didn't get people to look at those pages, you were fired. Cropping pictures, choosing fonts. When I first started, I thought, oh, I want to be art director, but it was a different world. I was like a chimney sweep compared to the other people who work there. Yeah, I really took time off and tried to figure out what it might mean to call myself an artist. I remember saying to people, can I just be an artist by working with paste up and magic marker? No, you can't do that. I realized I could use the fluencies as a designer.
So what we get to see with Barbara Kruger is this whole discussion about materials, accessibility, and what does it mean to create art. Another artist in New York, Willie Cole, also deals with similar themes, particularly with regard to Black history, but also understanding how our framework can shape and have a conversation with our present day and our history. I think we have enough time to share this.
The first iron that I worked with had nothing to do with my great-grandmother. It was just an iron that looked like an African mask. Of course, I saw the African mask, so I brought that to it based on my own filters of my life at that time. The objects begin to talk to you after a while. And before you know it, you can relate in many ways.
Willie Cole has been working with the motif of the iron, the steam iron, the ironing board, all the paraphernalia of ironing for over 30 years now. It has a presence in his life that goes back even further than that, because when he was a child growing up in Newark, his grandmother and his great-grandmother were both housekeepers, and they frequently asked him to fix their steam irons. The famous diagram of the Brooks slave ship that was published in the late 18th century has become something that he has directly connected to the shape of the ironing board, and therefore connecting the whole world of domestic labor with the long history of enslavement in America and otherwise, thinking about power, thinking about hierarchies, thinking about danger. And
so with those ideas, I would like to introduce our panelists today. The first panelist is Lillian Ribeiro. Did I pronounce your name correctly, Lillian? Yes.
Yes.
I'll take that as a yes.
Yes, thank you.
Is a multidisciplinary artist rooted in trauma-informed, participant-centered, applied theater, drama therapy practices. Lillian identifies as she, her, hers, trilingual, Luso-American, born and made in Newark, New Jersey. Nell Painter, the painter formerly known as the historian Nell Painter, is the author of The History of White People, Sojourner Truth, A Life and Symbol, Creating Black Americans, and the Edwards Professor of American History, lives and works in Newark, New Jersey. Her work carries discursive as well as visual meaning, and I make it, I'll just read it as her writing. And I make it in my characteristic manual and digital process, using found images and digital manipulation. I reconfigure the past and revision myself through self-portraits. After a life of historical truth and political engagement with American society, my artwork represents freedom, including the freedom to be totally self-centered. I can't see under my bar, including the freedom to be self-centered. Over here, I have Matt Gosser, is a photographer, filmmaker, sculptor, furniture designer, working primarily in the medium of found objects. He explores abandoned ruins, documenting the site and collecting artifacts to use in his artwork. So I guess we'll start off with Matt, and then we'll move in the order of, I believe it's Lillian and then Nell. And the first question I have is, how is your practice as an artist influenced by the framework of accessibility? So how do you, in your execution, your fabrication, the materials, or even the places that you choose to exhibit, in what ways are these themes of accessibility and technology and history a part of your practice? And if you feel comfortable, we can also engage the works that are currently on display with the Newark Arts Festival. And so we can start with Matt. This is the image that is a part of the Newark Arts Festival virtual exhibition at Newark Museum. And it's an image from the Westinghouse factory that's adjacent to the Broad Street train station during the demolition in 2007. So Matt?
Hi, everyone. You guys can hear me, right? You can hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. Okay, so my work as an artist is primarily about looking at things that are forgotten, especially parts of our cultural history in the form of buildings. So looking at factories, but that also includes looking at factory workers and the whole kind of, manufacturing culture, or the jail. Newark has this really old jail, still standing. It's been abandoned for like 50 years. And not many people know about it. So in my work, I like to shine a spotlight on these kind of forgotten places and bring them back to the public's attention. So this image right here is a collage of a worker who died at the Pabst Brewery. He had a heart attack while working on the line. And I found all these employee records, and they included little black and white photographs. And so I made his face out of everyone's face. Not everyone's, I'm still not even finished with this collage. It takes a while to get the right tone. So it's about the Pabst Brewery and what it meant to Newark, but it's also about, what went on there, exploring the process a little bit, exploring the people. And especially with the earlier shows that I did, they were about exploring Newark ruins and turning artifacts into artwork. I would reach out to the artist community and ask if anyone wanted to participate in this project. So usually there would be about 40 different artists, all kind of working at the same idea, which in this case was the Pabst Brewery, but also about theaters, also about churches at one point. We did this really interesting exhibit about the Queen of Angels Church. So I guess really just about looking at Newark's history and trying to show a spotlight, shine a spotlight on certain aspects of Newark's history. And from a personal standpoint, I think we can also talk about accessibility in terms of resources as an artist. And so I was working as an architect and decided to at first just work then part-time instead of full-time. And then eventually I went into teaching and was doing a bunch of different part-time things. But when you do that, you have to be concerned with money. So the idea of collecting artifacts and using those as my primary artistic material, it was free. So I was able to create artwork basically out of stuff that nobody wanted, and save myself a lot of money that way.
So did you at some point think that, oh, wow, I'm preserving working class history in Newark? I mean, what was it that was driving you besides accessibility to resources? Was it something about presenting these particular histories in Newark of working class people?
Not for every project, but it certainly was for some of them. Like, I mean, this one was, and not just this this piece right here, but there was a couple other pieces, a collage, a series of collages I did called Red, White, and Blue, which is the kind of the PAPS colors, but it was also indicative of white collar, blue collar, and the red was just, the building itself, the entity. So I think that, and also with the jail, that was also very much about the working class. Some of the specific pieces in there. There was a section of jail bar that I turned into American flag, and at the time it was during the Bush administration, and I was against a lot of the policies that were taking place there.
Mm.
So yeah, it's at certain points it does become about social issues, but not all the time, especially in the furniture design. The furniture design has almost nothing to do with those issues.
Mm, mm. Okay. Thank you, Matt.
Sure.
And the next is Lillian Ribeiro. This is the piece that's exhibited in the virtual gallery at Newark Museum. So Lillian.
So when I think of accessibility, I often reflect on my own experiences growing up in Newark, and knowing as a young person that I wanted to pursue the arts and study theater and dance and being involved in performing arts. And in my community, the only options at that time was being part of like the rancho, folklore dancing, which you see a little bit here reflected in my work in terms of like Luso-American identity. But I didn't want to do the rancho, like I didn't want to do the folklore dancing. My advantage was that my mom was a housekeeper, and she worked in areas like Westfield and Franklin Lakes. And while she would go to work to clean a house, I would be dropped off at like the YMCA in that area and I was involved in dance and the arts, and that's how I grew my love of the performing arts. And that became what started my love for theater and the arts. But in my community itself, growing up in the 80s, there was not access. So in terms of like being involved in performance, those outlets were very much just an extension of local organizations, maybe like the Girl Scouts or youth groups or school activities that we would be involved in. So my work that you're seeing here reflected is my personal portrait artwork, exploring identity, culture. You see here a codfish. This piece is called Do You Want to Smell My Codfish? There's a song in Portuguese that is called Maria deixa-me cheirar teu bacalhau, which is basically about like smelling Maria's codfish. And so, this piece is also like exploring a little bit about like identity, being sexualized in music, like those coded words of like what we grew up listening to. But my work in the theater arts that I do in the community, it goes back to accessibility. I always think about who are the young people that I could reach and work with, partnering with high schools, partnering with grammar schools, going out to the community centers, working with seniors in my community centers, engaging my own students in doing like work within the community to learn about the people of Newark and their stories, because our stories are so rich. Yeah. And that is what, even in my own experiences, hearing the story of when my father passed away from my mother, this work around my own pursuit in being educated in trauma-informed, participant-centered practices, understanding what our traumas are from me knowing from my own experiences what our youth has gone through. So a lot of my work, like this piece that you're looking at, is definitely looking at some of the traumas, even experienced this year with the pandemic. You know, the immediate shock of like, how do we keep ourselves safe? You know, there's no bleach, you know, we're wiping everything down with like these chemicals, and then loss and prayer and faith. And like, you see the American flag in the background and the manipulated image of like what's on today's menu. These are reflections of like politics, and like, we basically have to take it or leave it in what's going on politically. And I am about like active engaging, whether it's through the art or through theater practices, the community, so that we do find the power in our voices to speak out and to make change, right? So I think that when we are able to access, and that's why like I've always resonated with a theater practitioner, an applied theater practitioner named Augusto Boal. He is of Brazilian descent, and he always said, theater is a weapon, and it is the people who should wield it. And so I have always pursued that that form as well in my work in the community and communities I serve, that though many of the people that I work with don't identify as artists, you know, that's where the participant-centered work comes in, is meeting people where they're at, and then using like applied theater drama therapy techniques to tap in to identity work, story work, you know, valuing our stories, telling our stories, passing those stories on to young people and performing them, you know, hearing them, documenting them, that they stay existed. Because I always feel that for me, it's really important to protect and pass on the narratives of Norkers, the narratives of what we've experienced and why we are resilient, why we still continue fighting, you know, or just like just keeping our head above water, or like not giving up. And so, yeah, so a lot of my work is not only this work in like identity, because there's many identities that exist within myself that I'm always exploring, you know, even that identity. What does it mean to be a Nork artist? Am I doing enough work? Am I engaging enough in my own community? You know, it's so this like identity being Luso-American, identity only speaking Portuguese to my mom growing up, the identity of listening to like Spanish radio station and television growing up and speaking Spanish, or in the diverse community growing up in high school, you know, and all the different people that we've engaged with, and telling those stories, you know. And
I think one of the things that was really striking to me is when you posted this picture online before it became a part of the collage, was the fact that it resonated immediately with how I was feeling during that moment. So it's such a rare opportunity for art to really, like, when you posted it, it literally, my frustrations, my fears, all of those things in that immediate moment, I guess because I so often work with historical images and so on and so forth. And so I think this piece is, as all of the pieces are in the exhibition, are just so moving. I also like for this piece how you're using these images, the spiritual images that are a part of our everyday lexicon for this piece. So in a way, I think that's another aspect of accessibility, is because it pulls people in with images that we may see like around the house or in other places, and it brings it with this very contemporary image. And so next we'll have Dr. Nell Painter. Nell.
Thank you so much.
Hi.
I'm really delighted to be here because I'm not really there with you. My husband and I have been COVID sheltering in the Adirondacks since March. And we miss Newark so much. I really feel like a Newark artist, and I get Newark news every day. And I'm delighted to be remembered as a Newark artist. The piece that I have, it's actually a digitally manipulated series of drawings. It's an artist book called From Slavery to Freedom. And it was commissioned by a Pharaoh, so it's an Pharaoh publication. What you can see, and I don't know how much of this you can show, Noelle. Great, thank you. This is how it looks after going through Photoshop, after going through being digitized, and which does something to the contrast and the colors even. And so this piece exists in two versions. One is the Pharaoh version, which you have, which is the digitized images. And the other is the pieces that I have in my hand, basically, on paper. You ask about accessibility. And I think about it in my own practice in several ways. One of them is just the question of what support I work on. I make artist books, and that has a lot to do with my background, my past life as a writer of books. And I'll talk about writing in a moment. So I make books, and I make them fairly small, and accessibility is about the format and about the size, because I have moved around. So for instance, at the end of last year, I was at MacDowell residency in New Hampshire. So I had to carry my stuff up there. And then we came back very briefly, and I went to another residency in Italy, Bogliasco Foundation in Liguria. And that's where I made the artist book that precedes this one. It's called American Whiteness Since Trump. And if we have time, I can talk about that a little bit. This one, From Slavery to Freedom, pulls on my need for now the visual. I cannot think in narrative terms without envisioning my thoughts. The title of this, From Slavery to Freedom, resonates with a classic history by John Hope Franklin, first published in 1947. This was the history book that I grew up with in Oakland, California, and that taught me that the history that I was learning in school in Oakland, California was, how shall I say, not complete and often not true. So I had From Slavery to Freedom as a backup source to give me purchase on the country that I was living in and the history of the country I was living in. So in order to tip my hat toward John Hope Franklin, I called this From Slavery to Freedom. But it really is only about basically June 2020. It starts with the names of the many Black people whose lives have been sacrificed, very often to police brutality, sometimes to vigilantes who anoint themselves as the deliverers of justice in their own way. And then it goes to the destruction of the Confederate monuments. And I ask myself on another page, does this mean that we can turn the page from this Confederate slavery, kill Black people past? And then we have a couple of pages of the massive demonstrations. You see one there on the left, in which hundreds of thousands of Americans were saying, we want to move from slavery to freedom. And then there's an image of one version of slavery, which is Donald Trump and the Confederate flag, and the words to Dixie. And I underline in the bottom, old times there are not forgotten. So that page is full of history. And then the next pages are Juneteenth, Juneteenth activists on horseback, which has special resonance for me as a Californian whose father was a Texan who taught me how to ride. Uh, and um, and then I end with the words to what is now called the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. When I grew up, it was the Negro National Anthem because we were proud to be Negro, capital N, always. So that ends this narrative from one place, from slavery to freedom. So this is very much a history book, even though it works on two levels of history. One is the closer level of just June 2020, and the other goes from the Confederacy to Lift Every Voice and Sing. And for me, I don't foresee my art ever moving away from a resonance with history. There's just too much history in my life and in my heart. I love history. But in terms of accessibility, the way I express that needs to be, for now, in a format and a scale that I can carry around. And I actually learned the question of accessibility, of what you can carry around of your own art, from Faith Ringgold. Faith Ringgold said that she made quilts because she could roll them up and she could carry them around and she could show them in places in which just the shipping of stretch canvases, which is how she started working, would just be prohibitive. So it was at first a question of accessibility. What is accessible to you and what can you make visible to your public, that she started making quilts. And her quilts, again, speaking to me, are story quilts. They're quilts of her family story, of her life in art history, and how she wishes to enter history, remake history, literally in terms of quilts. Now, let me close by saying, you ask about what we are doing and what we've been doing during coronavirus time. Like many other visible Black people, commentators, I have been very busy talking, actually. So talking and writing. So I've written for the New Yorker and for the Paris Review and for the Washington Post. In the Washington Post, I advocated capitalizing the W in white at the time that we are capitalizing the B in Black, but for different reasons. We capitalize the B in Black out of respect. I am not saying we should capitalize the W in white out of respect, but out of visibility. And the visibility is to work against the asymmetry of the two different ideological racial designations. Most white people, I think of themselves as individuals. They don't think they have a racial identity. And they are learning that they do. And I think capitalizing the W in white helps that along. And I hope would help white Americans understand their place in history, in American history, as people within the ideology of race and within the practices of racism. So let me stop there and just close by saying thank you again, and by saying that part of me is visual and part of me still writes.
Thank you. I had a quick question. Did you have any struggle at the beginning of your practice combining the digital work with your hand markings and
Thank you. It took me my first year at the Rhode Island School of Design. And I actually learned how to do that up here in the Adirondacks in my summer studio. And I turned to the digital because as a historian, I was stuck on meaning in the way we use it in discourse. And what I needed to get to was visual meaning. And visual meaning is different from discursive meaning. And the great thing about using digital tools, and I use Photoshop most of the time, is that Photoshop is based on pixels. It's not based on thoughts. And the pixels don't care what they're next to. And the history in a pixel is only as long as you are using your computer. When you turn your computer off, if you don't save, it's gone. And that narrative is gone. So I was also, and this is going to make me sound really old-fashioned and silly, but when I was in art school, I discovered, thanks to my younger colleagues, this fantastic group called the Black Eyed Peas. And it was clear to me that their music was not the kind of, it was not like classical music in which you try to get as close as possible to the original sound. You try to get to how it would sound, say, in the concert hall. Not at all. It's digitally manipulated and it sounds great. So that helped me very much in the years between my first year and my second year at RISD to pull away from meaning in discursive terms and work much more closely to meaning in the visual sense.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you very much for that. And to demonstrate kind of what undergirds this talk is that all of these artists, as far as their private practice and their public facing practice, it almost seems seamless because as we've heard, folks have kind of moved back and forth between discussing how they choose materials, how they work with other communities. All three of these participants have been a part of like various academic institutions and working with groups and galleries in a very intimate way. Unlike some other artists, I know you all have different relationships with Gallery of Faro, Index, and Paul Robeson Gallery, which is also very unique about your practice. So I know we've talked about it a little, but in our closing, I just wanted to get some final thoughts about audiences, material and engagement in your public practice. I wanted to show folks that one of the articles that Nell wrote this summer, earlier in the summer, one thing we didn't explore so much in this talk, but it definitely lives with this talk, is which histories and which kind of visual art histories do we prioritize? And what, in the quote, she says, once this moment passes, we will need an accessible art history, righteous anger, as opposed that exiles these images to the margins. Why aren't these works a part of the art history canon? And so I would encourage you all to read that article. I also wanted to quickly share a video of Lillian's work with the seniors and the students where she demonstrates, I'll let it play.
My name is Lillian Ribeiro, and I'm an applied theater practitioner currently teaching the From Page to Stage course for the Rutgers NJIT Theater program. Right now, The students are interviewing the local seniors in Newark in preparation for their upcoming narrative-based performance, Into the Past with the Bethany Seniors of Newark. The students have spent several sessions with the seniors, getting to know them using the story circle methodology developed by Junebug Productions and through one-on-one interviews. The students then created monologues based on the interviews using the actual words of the seniors. They then shared their work with the seniors for either feedback, for revisions, or their final approval. On Monday, December 10th, watch as students of Rutgers and NJIT retell the story of the lives of the Bethany Seniors of Newark. The performance starts at 10 a.m. at Bradley Hall Theater on the 3rd floor at 110 Warren Street.
And I also, in closing, wanted to be sure to include, Matt has a project, and you might want to speak about it briefly. We'll do closing comments, brief closing comments. It's Art and Artifacts. It's actually connected to Index Gallery, where he shares some of the art that, or artifacts that he's reconfigured into art. He also uses a space as a gallery space for a local Newark artist. He's had a strong showing of actually women artists, which is, it exemplifies Matt's community practice. And just, I wanna make sure that folks get that address, that you all have the link for the Gallery of Pharaoh project that Nell is a part of. And also just to really explore everyone's work that they have on the website. So in closing, do any of you have final thoughts that you would like to share regarding this topic, or things for the audience to take with them?
I do. I love being part of the community of Newark artists. So much vibrant art. Some of it, a lot of it concerned with history and society, but not all. It's figurative, it's abstract. I would love for more people in the rest of the country to know about this. And as someone associated with MacDowell, which is an artist residency, I would like more Newark artists to take advantage of the artist residencies that are out there. You can find out about them through the Alliance of Artists Communities, and let other people know what fantastic art we are producing in Newark.
Thank you.
I wanted to share a quote by Ethan Kane. It says, "Artists, designers, planners, and architects alike must face the challenge of defining public space as an opportunity to create or improve the sense of community among those who will determine the use or abandonment of place." And I'm just really grateful, as Nell said, for our Newark artist community and all the many ways that we do that, which really helps enhance the revitalization of our neighborhoods and community. And the work sometimes goes unacknowledged, but it's always appreciated.
I would also like to add that it's a very exciting time to be a Newark artist. And as I shared before, growing up, I yearned for a community that we have today. And so I'm so grateful that we're here, we're collaborating, we're doing work, connecting to new people. And I just want to remind everyone, reach out to our local Newarkers, work with them, build community, include these pockets, because I think sometimes it can be very insular or feel discouraged or even intimidated in coming into circles that some younger people older people in our community that haven't been a part of our Newark Arts Circle, they might be intimidated. So welcome them, join them, invite them, reach out, you know, through boards that you normally wouldn't. Because sometimes I feel like if it wasn't for me having friends in the Newark arts community, I might not even be involved in my own, many people didn't even know I was a Newark artist when I started showing around. And I'm like, yeah, I've lived here all my life and I went to Rutgers Newark. And so like my point is, it's like continue opening up our circles and welcoming people and promoting your work in the communities. With that, I want to just share too that tomorrow, 5 of my students are going to perform monologues. They will be using the Lips Newark Instagram to go live with their performances. They will be sharing some of their videos performing. And so you could find more info on the Newark Arts Festival website to see those performances. It's based on their interviews with local Newarkers and Newark artists. So thank you for this opportunity, and please keep sharing the Newark arts love with everyone in our city and expanding more outside of Newark. I want to do those residencies now.
Yeah.
Matt, did you have any final comments before we?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been here in Newark. I kind of chose to stay here after I graduated from NJIT because I love the diversity of Newark, and I love the history of Newark. And then after that, I kind of developed a relationship with a lot of the people here and the artists in particular, and I wouldn't even think about leaving at this point. What I love about the arts community and the activist community, because Newark has a really strong activist community, whether it's for you know, gay rights or justice. You know, we saw that recently. You know, it hasn't gotten a lot of attention, but our city is kind of like the role model for how do you protest peacefully, non-violently. And I love that about Newark. And there are overlaps. There's a lot of times when the artists become activists, and there's a lot of time when the activists become artists. And I think those two communities in Newark are so strong, and there's plenty of opportunity for people to join in, whether it's activism or art.
Great. And finally, I just want to encourage all of the teachers, church group leaders, Boy Scout leaders, that when you're all working on projects and you want to explore themes about art, society, organizing, activism, visit these various resources. The Newark Arts website, we now have the Newark Artist Directory, and use these local examples, folks from Newark, to engage the students in different ways. You don't necessarily always have to use the artist that comes up in the Google immediately. I've learned that students really like when it's someone who is local, even though a lot of these artists have a national presence, but there's something about relating to folks on this local level that engages them. So that's a way that we can continue to use this technology as well as these virtual, I don't know how to explain it, virtual tools in ways that will expand our students and our community's versions or ideas of the world, as well as visiting our local organizations and institutions, including the Newark Museum, including the Newark Public Library, as well as our local galleries that work hard to sustain themselves, like Gallery of Faro, Index, and the other galleries. And on that note, I would just like to say thank you for everyone participating today. And thank you to the Newark Arts Council, the City of Newark, Fayemi Shakur, everyone for providing another opportunity for us to share the work that everyone is doing here to expand what it means to be human and understand what it means to further develop our communities. Great.
Thank you, Noelle. Thank you so much to all of our panelists, Nell Painter, Matt Gosser, Lillian Ribeiro, and our special guest, Fayemi Shakur, for a riveting conversation about the robust community of Newark artists and activists, as Matt so wonderfully pointed out. I also wanted to just point you out, Matt, for also being a part of our pop-up exhibit last night with those incredible photos of these often forgotten places. For me personally, seeing Pabst Brewery, which I lived next to for so many years when I lived on Grove Street and South Orange Avenue in the West Ward, really just brought up a sense of nostalgia and bridged that gap between what Newark has been in the past and where we're going in the future. And as our great former mayor, Kenneth Gibson, said, wherever American cities are going, Newark will get there first. And I truly believe that. And after listening to this fabulous panel, I feel confident that all of the work that we are doing with our artist community is pushing us forward and leading the way as an example for the entire country and indeed the world. So thank you all for joining this panel discussion. This closes out our Newark Arts Festival panel series. Thank you so much. Please visit NewarkArtsFestival.com. Visit our virtual gallery that's modeled after our partner, the Newark Museum of Art. We also want to say thank you to our title sponsors, Prudential and Verizon, for your generous support, especially in this moment where art now more than ever is so necessary to get us through this moment as we look at our history, as we look at our spaces, as we look at our humanity and people and move ourselves forward, and indeed during this pandemic. So thank you for your support, and we look forward to seeing you guys at our event tonight, Newark Live, which is going to be broadcasting live on Zoom. You can register on NewarkArtsFestival.com or also visit on the Newark Arts Facebook Live. It's going to be featuring Newark Arts board member and son of Newark, the infamous do-it-all Dupre Kelly from the legendary Lords of the Underground. He'll be performing live tonight along with some live painting by Suleiman Unke, and that will be broadcast, streaming live from the Ironbound Film and Television Studios. So thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you tonight, and have a great festival season.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.